All right, peace to the family. To borrow that one, borrow that intro from the brother Sonetta, that good peace to the family. All right, so tonight, on this episode of the Black Prophet Hour, we're gonna be dealing with a very, very touchy subject, that deals with a cross section of people, from the Aboriginal community and from the Hebrew Israelite community. And the subject we're going to be dealing with tonight, is the copper-colored Aboriginal myth. But before we get started, just really quick, who we got in here? I see we got about 4 or 5 viewers so far, so definitely say what's up in the chat room. You know, we like for this to be an engaging experience. So if you're watching, you know, definitely let us know you in here. Who we got in the building so far? Somebody say something. Peace, my brother David. You from Chicago, right, David? My brother Dave, you from Chicago? Okay, that's what I thought, man. Appreciate you coming back. It's always good to have you here. You know, hopefully we all continue to grow together, right? You know, this is only the second broadcast for the channel, you know, and I anticipate that, you know, we'll continue to grow as a channel, continue to grow as a community. Like I said, when I did the first broadcast, one of the things that I'm looking to do, peace, my sister Ajaya, man, we've been connected on Twitter for a minute now. My sister doing that good healing work. I think you down there in Atlanta, so peace to you, Queen. But yeah, like I was saying to the brother David, like one of the things we're looking to do with this space is really, we trying to build one of the most intelligent audiences, you know, in this Black YouTube space. You know, we're trying to increase consciousness. We're trying to grow. We're trying to engage. You know, learn from one another. Next weekend, I got a really, really special treat for y'all. My wife and I, we were down in New Orleans earlier this year, and when we were there, we visited the Whitney plantation, which was a really, you know, it was a really interesting experience. But before I left the plantation, I got a chance to purchase 2 books from the library down there. The first book is Slavery and African Ethnicities in America, and the second book is Africans in Colonial Louisiana. So the author of this book, Dr. Gwendolyn Midlow Hall, she's going to be on next Sunday at 7 p.m. So I'm going to be interviewing her. So definitely, if you have any questions, come through. It's going to be a live interview. Hopefully, it'll be engaging and informative. All right. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I appreciate my sister Ajay and my brother David for y'all being here with me tonight. So let's go ahead and build. So before we get started tonight, I want to ask one question. Are all of y'all familiar with the Webster's Dictionary definition, specifically the 1828 definition in Webster's Dictionary of the word American? Give me a yes or no if you're familiar with that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and assume that most of us have heard that. Okay, my brother David said no, sir, but um, so I guess I won't make that assumption. But if you're on social media, let me share my screen. Uh, let's share my screen with the family real quick. All right. So, you know, there's a really good chance that you've probably seen this meme right here before, somewhere on social media. You've probably seen it on Twitter. You've probably seen it on Facebook. A lot of Hebrew Israelites, a lot of people from the Aboriginal community often share this particular meme, or some of the other sorts that you get. You'll see a picture of what they'll refer to as a $5 Indian next to an African American, and what they'll have is a stack of pennies in between. Peace, Devin. But yeah, what they'll have is a stack of pennies in between, to basically insinuate that the definition from Webster's Dictionary, the 1828 version, supports the idea that African Americans or Black people here in America are actually Aboriginal or the indigenous people of this land, and not the so-called $5 Indian, which they like to refer to them as. So what I want to do tonight is I want to take us over to Webster's Dictionary, the 1828 version. We can all see that here. I'm going to read the definition for you guys. But we're going to do a little bit more than just looking at the definition, because oftentimes what I see is people in the community, they read this definition and then they don't look for any contextual situations or literature where they can see this definition being used in literature to know if they are applying it to Black people or African Americans, whatever you want to call yourself, or if they're applying it to the Native Americans, or the $5 Indians, like people from the Aboriginal community like to refer to them as. So I'll read the definition here quickly. So it says American, a noun, a native of America, originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races found here by the Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of the Europeans born in America. Right. So a lot of our brothers and sisters in the Aboriginal community, they take this copper-colored races to mean that this definition of American proves their point that the Aboriginal people of America were actually, Black, like you and I. Right. So they'll put these types of memes all over social media where they'll say a copper color. Right. So they'll have a penny, and they'll put a penny next to, somebody's hand, or they'll put a penny next to somebody's face, and compare that penny to like a Native American and say, well, who's really copper colored, right? So here's a good one right here. Who is really the copper colored person, right? So you see on the right here, you have what they'll refer to as the $5 Indian, and then on the left side here, you have what's typically referred to in America as African Americans, right? So they use this claim, or this dictionary, to substantiate the argument that Black people were actually, or really, the Aboriginals to this land. So I want to push back on that argument because I think that it is taken out of context, and I think that it is misinterpreted. And I understand why. Most of us look at a penny and we see, well, a penny is brown, and or most copper pennies that we see, they're brown, and I'm brown. So if they're saying that the original people were copper colored, I look copper colored, so I must be the original people, right? So I can understand how we reach that conclusion, although, logically speaking, there's a lot of fallacies associated with that. So what I want to do before I actually go into some text from that time period that actually uses the term copper colored to applying it to the natives or to the indigenous people here, I want to start with a scientific breakdown of copper, right? So we're not just going to do this with the text. We're also going to use a little bit of science, right? Because I want our people to have an understanding, right? Because I think that we suffer oftentimes because of a lack of understanding. So one thing that we need to know is that when copper is first minted, right? When these pennies are first minted, they actually do come out red, right? They don't come out brown. But over a period of time, the red penny actually goes to be a brown penny, right? And I'll link this article in the description. Um, I didn't want to find something that wasn't accessible to people, but I read through this article, and the author seems to be credible. So I'm going to use this article as my source, but I'm quite sure you can find other information online that will substantiate just the scientific process of how a red copper penny can turn into a brown copper penny. So I'll start there, right? So it says a copper coin when first struck exhibits a lustrous reddish orange color. These specimens are prized by coin collectors and carry a value premium over identical coins that are starting to turn brown, right? So they're letting you know that these copper colored pennies turn brown over time. They're letting you know already. It says most coin collectors will agree that if a copper coin has retained about 90% of its original orange-red color, it will be designated as red and abbreviated its grade as RD, right? But here's where we get to the science. It says once oxidation and chemical reactions start to occur on the surface of a copper coin, its color will start to change from reddish orange to brown. This may include some areas of the coin that are approaching a chocolate brown color, while other areas still have some of the original reddish orange color. A common measurement is between 10% and 90% of the original orange-red color remains. This is termed as a red-brown coin and is abbreviated as red-brown. When a majority of the coin surface has reacted with the atmosphere, such that the surface of the coin is almost entirely chocolate brown, this is considered a brown coin and is designated as BN. So why am I reading that? I'm showing this to us and to people who actually believe in the argument of the copper colored races, but they only use the definition in the dictionary to support their claim, and a random penny that they find and hold it next to their skin. I'm showing us this to show that putting a brown penny next to your skin doesn't necessarily substantiate your claim that we are the copper colored races, right? Because these pennies turn color over time. When they're originally minted, they are a bright reddish color, right? And if you were to put that bright reddish color on your skin, it wouldn't be the same color as your skin. You would see the difference. But over time, it goes from bright red or what they call reddish orange to reddish brown to brown, right? So if you put a brown penny next to your skin and you say, well, this is a copper penny, well, scientifically, copper, as it's exposed to air over time, is going to turn to brown, right? So that's not an argument that supports the claim that Black people in America or African Americans are the original copper colored races, right, that they're referring to here in this 1828 Webster's Dictionary. So are we all clear on that? Let me take a quick poll of the chat room. Hit the number one, press one if you think that Black people in America are the copper colored races that they're referring to in this definition right here. Press one if you believe that. We need your participation. It's a quick poll. We ain't gonna be here long tonight, but want to get the chat room engaged. All right, brother Devin said no, he doesn't believe. Okay, press one if you believe it. Press two if you don't. If you believe that the African Americans or the black people in America today are the Aboriginal or copper-colored race that was found here by the Europeans, press one. If you don't believe it, press two. Okay, my sister Ajay said one, but not because of that definition. Okay, I can rock with that. I can rock with that. My brother David said two. All right, all right. Can definitely rock with that. I appreciate the participation. All right, we're gonna keep going. And towards the end of this, you guys know I always open it up for Q&A. At the end, if you want to actually come on and engage with me in discussion, you are more than welcome to come on. Just send me your email, and I'll send you a link so you can actually join the Hangout, and we can discuss face to face. All right. So let me go ahead and keep it moving. I appreciate everybody's participation. And Sister Ajay, at the end, I would definitely love to hear a little bit more from you in terms of the one, but not because of the definition. All right, so let me move along. All right, so what I have here, right, is I'm going to start with a quick reading where copper-colored races is actually contextualized from us, right? So what I'm reading from is Harriet Beecher's. This is not actually Uncle Tom's Cabin. This is from this particular text, Primary Geography for Children on an Improved Plan, right? So this particular chapter or lesson is lesson 13, and they're dealing with races of men. This was written in 1833, right? So it's around the time of when that definition came out, right? So I showed you the definition in the 1828 dictionary. Now I'm going to show you it used in actual written context, right? So let's go. It says, the inhabitants of this world are different in their appearance according to the country that they inhabit. Some are white, like the people of America. Some have dark yellowish complexion. Some are copper colored, and some are black. They are therefore divided into 5 classes according to their appearance. The classes are the European, the Asiatic, the African, the American, and the Malayan. All people in Europe, excepting in Lapland and Finland, belong to the European race. The people in the western part of Asia, as far as the river Obi, those in the Barbary states in Egypt and in Abyssinia also belong to this race. They have fair complexions, and their features are more regular and beautiful than those of any other class. Mind you, this is 1833, so please expect a fair amount of white supremacy, to be written into this language, right? So let's keep on moving. It says the white people in America belong to this class and came originally from Europe. There is, however, a difference in complexions of this race. Those natives who live in the south part of Europe are darker than those who live in the north. And those in the Barbary states and in Egypt are darker than those in Europe. Here are pictures of a European and an Asiatic, right? So, you see, this is the picture. Unfortunately, it's not in color, but they essentially both look. The European is on the left, the Asiatic is on the right. I wish I had this in color, but I assume what they're trying to depict here is the European is a lighter white, whereas though the Asiatic is a darker white, which kind of like supports what they're arguing in the text. So it says, before the white people came over to America, it had many tribes of people in it. Some of these tribes still remain in the United States and in the countries north of it and in South America. These from what are called the American race, or it says these form what are called the American race. They have copper-colored skin, long black hair, small dark eyes, and very thick lips and broad noses. If you look on the map of Asia, you will see a country called Malaya, and you notice the islands around it. This country and all these islands together with Australia and Polynesia are inhabited by the Malay race. These people are different from the American and having a brown instead of a copper-colored skin, and in having soft curly black hair instead of straight and coarse. Many of the Malay race are handsome, for the complexion often is not darker than some of the darkest ones in our country. The African race have black the African race have black woolly hair and black skin. They live principally in the middle parts of Africa. Here are pictures of an African and an American, right? So mind you, they say the American was copper colored, right? And the African, they're saying, they're depicting him as black, right? You see the pyramid in the back of the African. You see the Native American with what appears to be a teepee in the back. He has a pipe in his mouth, and a feather headdress, right? So if we read here, it says the African race have black woolly hair and black skin. They live principally in the middle parts of Africa. Here are pictures of an African and American. So the reason why I'm showing this here is if we look to the text, they always draw a distinction between the African, who they depict as black, and the copper-colored American, who they typically depict as red, or who folks in a lot of folks in the Aboriginal community would refer to as $5 natives. You know what I mean? So I won't even go back there. I'll keep on going, right? But that's the first piece of text, and the reason why I wanted to start there, because it's important that we don't only use the definition to support the claim. It's important that we go to the text and see, okay, when they're writing about this in the text, when they're writing about copper-colored people in the text, how are they describing them? I wish I actually had this in color to show you, but like unfortunately we don't. But what we can see, even from this black and white version, is that they're making a depiction between the African and the American. You know what I mean? Now, those of us in America who refer to ourselves as African Americans, or who are referred to as African Americans, many of us have, I guess, inherently, even in the name, we have a mixed heritage. Many of us are, have parts European in us, parts Native ancestry, and parts African ancestry. I was listening to a lecture once from Dr. Charshi McIntyre, and her advice for us was that we honor every part of our blood that is honorable, right? So, honor, if we have Native ancestry, we should honor it. If we have African ancestry, we should honor that as well. But what we find, and oftentimes in the Aboriginal community, is a complete denial of African ancestry. And I'm going to do a broadcast next week that gets into why I believe that is. But you know, it's a almost like fanatical embracing of Aboriginal or Native or Indigenous culture, and a fanatical denial of African culture. I remember growing up, it was very common for us to often hear, well, I got Native American blood, or, I got Cherokee blood, which is why I got good hair or high cheekbones. That was very common, you know what I mean? And we didn't necessarily debate it with people, but we accepted it. Okay, that's cool. You got Native American blood and you got African blood. That's perfectly fine. But now what you have is something completely different, where people are like, no, I am 100% indigenous to this land. My ancestors never came from Africa. Slavery didn't happen. All that stuff is a lie. This is my land, and I'm indigenous to this land. And if you look at the dictionary says copper-colored races. Look at a penny, look at my skin, I'm copper colored. They talking about me, right? So this argument tonight is just basically debunking that whole claim. But the way I'm debunking it is not only just using science that shows how a copper penny changes colors, but I'm using text from the period, right? So this particular text was from 1833. So the second text I'm going to give you comes from Robert Knox. It was written in 1850. And it's called The Races of Men. Now, this is an excellent book if you want to understand how white people think, if you want to understand their plans and designs for the dark races of the world. And we have to remember that these racial characterizations were created by white people, and they were created by white people for the express purpose of subjugating, exploiting, and if they can't subjugate and exploit, ultimately exterminating non-white people all around the world. Right? So I would recommend you read this book, because they lay it out very clear for you in here. They we will, as white people, we will never live at peace with any of these dark races. We will do all that's within our power to exterminate them and chase them off the face of the earth. Right? Dr. Francis Press Welsing told us about it. Like, numerous of our scholars have spoken to the white problem. Some of them have dealt with it from a spiritual perspective. You know, some have dealt with it from a biological perspective, you know, their lack of melanin, or from a spiritual perspective, their lack of spirit. From a geographical perspective, you know, they are ice people. Like we've done all types of different deterministic theories to figure out what's up with this white man, and why this white man cannot live in harmony with the earth and with the other people of the earth. But my point that I want to get across is racial classifications, although many of us have to adopt them in order to fight or engage in this war, racial classifications were something that was started by white people for the express purpose of exploiting, subjugating, and if necessary, exterminating non-white people. Right. So I want to go to this book. It's called The Races of Men, and it's written by Robert Knox. This is in 1850. Right. So now we're 22 years out from Webster's the Webster's definition that was written in 1828, talking about copper-colored races, right? So I think this still serves as a good use for the same time period, right? So what I'm going to do here for you is, I already searched it, so the term copper. So together, what we're going to do here is we're going to go to each time Robert Knox uses the term copper-colored race or copper-colored people, and we're going to see how he's describing them or what he's saying of them, you know, because this will give us a good idea of what the people of the time were thinking when they were referring to copper-colored races. Were they referring to black people or Africans, or were they referring to natives, or who they referred to as red Indians, right? So I think that it's important for us to do this level of scholarship or this level of study, and not necessarily do meme scholarship and, you know, just place a meme on Facebook with a brown penny next to Kobe Bryant and with a red Indian next to him and say, well, copper colored races, you know, they talking about us. They're not talking about them. So let's start. The first time we see it in the book, move my screen over a little bit so y'all can see the full thing. Okay. So the first time we see it in the book is in a chapter called Physiological Law. The next time you see it in the book is going to be in a chapter called The Dark Races, and the remaining use of it is going to be in the Dark Races. So in the Dark Races, they basically, it's a chapter or a lecture that Robert Knox, he has a section in there for each race that is non-white, and he is basically breaking them down, right? So he does a chapter on the American, he does a chapter on the Malayan, he does a chapter on the African, and he does a chapter on the Asian, right? And he calls them all the dark races, right? So the first time we see copper color used in the book is going to be in the beginning, where they're dealing with physiological law. Another term for that during that period, I mean, in our period, we were referred to it as evolution, but in their period in the 1850s, because mind you, Darwin, and I'm not a Darwinian. I actually do not believe in Darwin's theory of evolution. I do believe in evolution, but I do not believe in Darwin's theory of evolution. I think that we need to draw a distinction, because Darwin's theory of evolution is inherently racist. I don't believe that mankind grew from apes. You know, that's not where I am. But needless to say, Darwin's book hadn't been written yet. Mind you, this is in 1850. Right, so Darwin's evolution, they're not even using that term yet. Right now, they're using what they refer to as physiological law. Right, so let's deal with the first time it's mentioned. So let's start. It says, when the best blood of Spain migrated to America, they killed as many of the natives, that is, the copper-colored Indians indigenous to the soil, as they could. But this could not go on. Laborers to till this soil being required. The old Spaniard was found unequal to this. He could not colonize the conquered country. He required other aid, native or imported. Then came the admixture with the Indian blood and the Celt-Iberian blood, the produce being the mulatto. But now that the supplies of Spanish blood have ceased, the mulatto must cease too, for as hybrid, he becomes non-productive after a time if he intermarries only with the mulatto. He can no longer go back to the Spanish blood. That stock has ceased. Of necessity, then, is he forced upon the Indian breed. Thus, year by year, the Spanish blood disappears, and with it the mulatto, and the population retrograding towards the indigenous inhabitants returns to the Indian population, the hereditary descendants of those whom Cortez found there, whom nature seemingly placed there, not aliens, not foreigners, but Aboriginal. As it is with Mexico, so it is with Peru. Right. So let's just discuss this excerpt right here. In this particular excerpt, he uses copper colored. He doesn't necessarily give any other descriptions besides referring to the Indians and calling them copper colored. But I think that it's important to note, like some of the clues that we can take away from here is it's important for us to understand when we're dealing with the text and we're studying the history, especially the history of North America or the Americas, who are we talking about? Are we referring to the British? Are we referring to the French? Are we referring to the Spanish? Are we referring to the Portuguese? Who are we dealing with? Because each of these people had different classifications and terms for the native population. Now, the Spanish population that came here, we know that the Treaty of I believe it's called the Treaty of Torres or whatever it's called, that split essentially the globe for the Portuguese and the Spanish, and as a result, the Portuguese got Brazil, and then the Spanish got everything essentially to the left of Brazil, which is why they got Mexico and many of the Caribbean islands. But I think it's always important for us to identify which European we're dealing with in the story, because each of these Europeans had different approaches to how they dealt with the Native Americans. For example, the Spanish were very brutal, right? So this writer is actually a British writer. So one of the things that he notes here, he says, the Spanish was found unequal to this. He could not colonize the conquered country. He required other aid, native or imported. And what does this mean? The reason why the British are saying the Spanish were not good colonizers, brother James Jones, what's up with you, bro? Welcome to the chat. But the reason why the British were saying that the Spanish were not good colonizers is because the Spanish approach was simple. Everybody that they found here was a heathen, was wicked, was demonic, was a pagan. They were not worshipers of the one true God, and they needed to be killed. For instance, when the Spanish first stepped foot in Florida, the first thing they did was the chief that they encountered, they beat him in front of his nation, and they took his wife and they brutally ripped her body into several pieces. So that's how like the Spanish dealt with the natives. It was purely genocide, right? The French, on the other hand, they were a little bit more slick, right? The French would come in, and what the French would do is they would try to create alliances with different native groups, right? So the French would join an alliance with the Choctaws against the Chickasaws, right? So that's how the French would essentially try to claim the land or colonize the land. The British were very different. The British would come in with their guns, and they would say to one group, like the Iroquois or one of the groups on the East Coast, they would say, here goes some guns. They would say, okay, you have to pay for them with people. So what would the Iroquois do, or the Chickasaw? They would go and raid the Choctaw, or they would go and raid their neighbor, and so the British essentially started slave raiding. They introduced slave raiding here. The Portuguese were also very shrewd. What the Portuguese would do after they killed off the men, they had more of a long game or a long game approach. So the Portuguese, what they would do is they would sleep with the native woman, and they would produce children. Now, in these mulatto or mixed breed children, the Portuguese would use them to rule over the population. So it's important that when we're reading historical texts, especially as it relates to Americas, we have to understand who are we dealing with, right? Because the British, the Spanish, the French, the Portuguese, they all had different strategies for colonizing. Now, the Spanish, by 1820, they were completely moved out of the Americas, which is why he's saying here, but now that the supplies of Spanish blood have ceased, he's saying that because after the Spanish War, the Spanish basically had to flee back to Europe, right? So he's saying now that the Spanish supplies of blood have ceased, the mulatto must cease too. For as a hybrid, he becomes non-productive after a time if he intermarries only with other mulattoes. He can no longer go back to the Spanish blood that stock has ceased. Of necessity, then, is he forced upon the Indian breed. Thus, year by year, the Spanish blood disappears, and with it the mulatto, and the population retrograding towards indigenous inhabitants returns to the Indian population. Right? So that was the first time we saw copper used in the text, and it was used in physiological law. Let's look at the next time we see it used in the text. Okay. Take a sip of water here. Exactly, brother sweet James Jones, a buffer glass. They use it very effectively, and quiet is kept. The British are ingenious because they deploy a buffer class strategy. They've done it here in America, and they also do it in South Africa, while also employing a one-drop rule. So they make the argument that anybody who has one drop of blood is essentially black or Negro, but in practice, they actually look to lift up a buffer class, because if you lift up a buffer class without actually recognizing it, what you do is slowly but surely over time, you can do away with that third class or that bottom class, which is like those of us who are closer to African, or those of us who are closer to our African features. So the British try to promote a culture where, you know, we are essentially practicing colorism. You know what I mean? So you want to see that lower tier of society over time get lighter and lighter to the point that the African features are moved out of the population, right? So that's how the British do it, right? So let's look at the second time it's used in the text. And this, again, it's in physiological laws, right? So here we have, where is it? Okay. It says, it is to Hippocrates we owe the story of the macrophili, inhabiting at that time the shores of the Ixine. Excuse me for not being able to pronounce that. They were a race with narrow, elongated, elevated heads and depressed foreheads, like the American Indians, or copper-colored race, and more especially like the Carib and like the Chinook. The Carib is short for Caribbean. This variety and form, the illustrious Greek explains in this way. For of the unity of mankind he never doubted any more than any other strictly scientific man. He fancied, for it was mere fancy, that this extraordinary form of head was at first produced by pressure, but in time this pressure became unnecessary, the malformation becoming permanent by the hereditary descent. So what he's saying here is that the way that they would identify an American or a copper-colored person is because the nations of the copper-colored races, they would form the heads of their children by applying pressure to their children's heads when their children are infants. But he's saying that over time, these nations no longer had to do it because their DNA now they through subsequent generations, they no longer have to physically apply pressure, because now the DNA has been altered or modified to the point that their offspring are being born with these types of heads. Right? So he writes, the form of the head I speak of is peculiar to the race. It may be exaggerated somewhat by such means, but cannot be so produced. Neither will such deformation become hereditary. For 4,000 years have the Chinese been endeavoring to disfigure the feet of their women. Have they succeeded in making the... Okay, so what I'm reading here, this is Robert Knox essentially arguing against with the Greek writer Hippocrates. Hippocrates is actually not a Greek writer, he's a Greek doctor, right? So we know here with white supremacy, they start off every art, every science, they started off with somebody from Greece, even though we know that the Greeks were taught by our ancestors from Kemet. So in the field of medicine, you always have to take what they refer to as the Hippocratic Oath, right? So what Robert Knox is doing right here is he's arguing against Hippocrates by saying that no, like, you know, you can't make hereditary change. So I don't think that this particular use of copper-colored people gives us you know, any additional insight either. So let's look at another one. Where are we? Okay. This is right here is also dealing with a Hippocratic theory, um, where he's talking about the effects of climate. He says the men were Europeans. Okay, so what he's looking at with this particular use is he's saying that Hippocrates was making an argument about evolution that was basically saying that Europeans crossed the Bering Strait, and as Europeans crossed the Bering Strait and they came in contact with different climates, like the copper penny, over time, these people changed color and they got darker, right? So I'll read from here just to give us hold on one second. I don't want to lose where I was. Where was I? Okay, I'll read from here just to give us better context. Um, In the virgin forests of America stalked no elegant elephants. The river horse and the terrible rhinoceros were nowhere to be found. But other equally strange forms presented themselves, peopling the fields and rivers and forests, all differing specifically and generically, as we express this grand and solemn fact in technical language. I call it a solemn fact, seeing that it gives rise to profound reflections. Whence came this new race of men and animals? The answer was easy upon the old Hippocratic theory of the effects of climate. The men were Europeans, burnt to a copper color by the sun and wind and other things, including the smoke of their wigwams, right? So, right here, he's he's showing that during that period there were people who, when they looked at the copper colored races of aboriginals here in America, they were deploying a theory of evolution, but they weren't calling it evolution at that time. Mind you, he wrote this in 1850, so he called it the Hippocratic theory, where he says the Hippocratic theory, the effects of climate, right, which is evolution, the effects of climate over time, right, changes, right? So it says Hippocratic theory, the effects of climate. The men, they were Europeans, but they were burnt to a copper color by the sun and wind and other things, including the smoke of their wigwams. So he's basically saying that, hey, these Native Americans started off as pale, right? They were pale white men. But when they migrated and peopled this new part of the earth, over time, they became copper colored or they became red Indians, as a result of the sun and as a result of, I think this is a bit ludicrous, but he says, as a result of the smoke from the pipes that the Native Americans used to smoke, right? So let me just keep on moving from there. Where's the next? There's not that many more here. Um, Here, what he's doing here is he's essentially lambasting some of the religious arguments for the peopling of America. Just like today, right, with like the Hebrew Israelites. Back then, there were religious fanatics who believed that the Native American was the lost tribes of Israel, right? So what he's doing here is saying, like, let us leave this retarded shit alone. Like he's saying that the theory exists, but like we shouldn't even give it any attention. So I'll read what he's saying. He says, I believe offered the credulous. Where should I start? I'll start on the previous page, which is 166. I'm trying to find a sentence to begin with. All right, I'll start here. It says, copper colored race of America, that race which extended throughout the length and breadth of the land, were neither metamorphed Welshmen, nor Connaught men, nor Norwegians, nor even Polynesians. So what he's doing right now is he's prefacing the religious argument that people make. He's saying that no, these copper colored races, these people weren't Europeans. They weren't, Welshmen or Connaught men or Norwegians or Polynesians. He's saying no, there was another hypothesis that people had during this time. And he says, I believe offered the credulous for the people of America, always accepting that standby of the thoroughbred theorists, namely, right, and here's the other theory that people had, that the copper Indians, that is the true Americans, were the lost tribes of Israel who fled there on rafts, headed, I suppose, by Prester John, right? And he says, like, he's basically like kind of like making fun of that like argument, but he's saying Let us leave such sickening, silly follies to their inventors and to those who hate truth. Right? So he's not even addressing that. He's writing it off he's saying, hey, this isn't even a scientific argument. These are religious ideologues who came here to America because they were being persecuted because of their religion when they were in Europe. So they came here to America. So they have these flights of fancy that these new people that we see here are in fact the lost tribes of Israel. So he's saying like, no, we're not even going to deal with that. Let's keep it moving. You know what I mean? So next argument he has here. He says, I allude more especially to the race known by the name of red, right, or copper-colored Indians, extending as it would seem from Nootka Sound and the borders of the Arctic Circle to the rock-bound shores of the Land of Fire, including probably all of West India Islands, the tribes of Brazil, and the Caribs. Now, I think it's this right here, this part is important because this part, he's also going to draw a distinction, right? He's letting you know in this part that the copper-colored natives are not the same color as the African, right? But he doesn't even use the African. Right here, he's going to use the Malayan or the Polynesian, right? So if you look at the people of Australia, this is who he's going to compare the copper-colored people to, right? So we see in the text when they're using copper-colored people, they aren't talking about people who look like the people from Australia or people who look like people from Africa. They are talking about a distinct class of people who they perceive as red, right? Let me, what did I just do? Okay, so this is where I was. It says, at the extremities of this long and singularly shaped continent, it seems to me that two other races, which may be termed polar or Arctic, exist. To the north, we are certain that the Eskimo differ essentially from the Red Indian. So he's saying that the Eskimos in Alaska, he's like, no, they aren't the same color, right? As they differ. They look a little bit more Mongolian than the Red Indian, right? And then he says, in the South, it is probable that the miserable dark-colored population wandering on the outskirts of the Land of Fire are not Red Indians, but a race analogous to the Australian, right? So he's arguing here that in the deep South, not in the South of North America, like present day, like Florida or like Louisiana. He's saying like in South America, right? Like in deep South America, he's saying that it is probable, right? Right? Because he doesn't know. Well, no. Hold on. Okay, right. So he's saying, I hate when I click on that like that. He's saying that in the deep South, uh, that there is a race analogous or similar to the Australian and to the former inhabitants of the Van Diemen's Land. Polar Arctic races of men, dark in color, swarthy, peculiar. I speak particularly of the Eskimo. Thus, in America, the races darken as we approach the poles, right? So you understand what he's saying here? He's saying that in North America, the races there are copper red, right? They are copper in color. But as we go further north towards the North Pole, they start to get darker. So he's saying the Eskimo is a little bit darker. And he's saying, as we go further south, getting closer to the equator, the indigenous people there, they get darker as well, right? They start to look like the Polynesian or like the Australian. So that's what he's saying here. But I'm just pointing this out because when we're saying that the Native Americans, we're talking about America today, right? So we're saying North America, where we live at presently as African Americans, blacks, whatever you want to call us, we're making the argument that we are those copper-colored races. And I'm showing you that during the period where that definition was created, if we look to text from that period, they are not talking about people who look like you and I. They're drawing a clear distinction. They're saying if you go deeper south, like Central and South America, you'll start to see darker races of people who look similar to the people in Australia. But even in the previous text, right, the text that was here, right? They even tell you here that they make a distinction between the like the Australian and Polynesian, right? Uh, they say that that's the Malay race or the brown race. They make a distinction between the Malay race and the African race, right? They say the Malay race is brown, the African race is black, the American race is red, right? So they are making a distinction between each. But even, so the point that I'm trying to make is, those of us who are descendants, the people who were born here as prisoners of war, many of us have mixed heritage, right? Like, my family is from, 30 miles off the coast of the Georgia Shore, down in Savannah, from a little place called Little Wissy. But my ancestry traces back to coming to this country in 1784 from the Mandinka tribe in West Africa. But my family here in America, they served on rice plantations, right? That's where they were forced to serve as enslaved people, down in what you would refer to as like the Gullah Geechee people. That's where my family is from, right? But well, I'm just trying to tell you that if we look at history and understand the text, they always are making distinctions. They're making a distinction between the copper-colored Aboriginal, the African, and the Malaysian. They always make a distinction, right? So let me look at the last point in here. I think we just covered that one already. So I think this might be the last one, right? This is where he's concluding. And mind you, this is in the chapter called The Dark Races of Men. So in this chapter, he deals with Malaysians, he deals with Africans, he deals with Americans, and he deals with Asians. He deals with all non-white people. If you are not a white person, you are amongst the dark races, or what they refer to as the colored races, right? So you're either black, you're brown, you're red, or you're yellow. You're a part of the colored race, right? So here he's just concluding. I don't think that he necessarily gives us any, good descriptions here, but I'll read the first, I guess, paragraph and a half for you guys, just so you can see that I'm not trying to cheat you out of any information. And I'll also post this link in the description for you. But he says, I shall conclude with a single remark on the position of the copper-colored race or races of Northern America, and on the progress of the question of race has made since the delivery of my first course lectures on the races of men. You know what? You guys can actually read this for yourself if you want. I'll post it in the description. I've already read it. What he's about to do basically is reconclude. He's about to restate his argument, essentially, that he doesn't really believe in like the evolution. He doesn't believe that the red man became red because he's essentially a a white man, who through evolution, because of the climate, has turned to red. He's going to make the argument here that he doesn't believe that. So I'll finish off there, and I will open up the chat at this point, for anybody who wants to weigh in on what was just said. Again, the purpose of this presentation was for me to show that, when people are using this 1828 definition that says, the copper colored races of America, or the Aboriginal copper colored races, and they then take that and they find a copper penny and they put it on their skin and say, oh, they're talking about us. I'm basically debunking that. Now, our sister Ajaya, who was in the chat, she said that she does believe that we are the Aboriginal, but not because of the penny. That's a conversation I would be willing to entertain and to discuss. If she wants to come on, she can actually give me her email, and I'll send you a link so you can come on. Um, but that's basically it. I think that, you know, let's do another poll. Hit one if you still believe that, when they refer to copper colored races, that they're referring to, people who look like me and you. Hit one if you believe that. If you still believe that after seeing, the text that I showed today. Hit two if you don't believe that. Okay, Sister Ajay, would you like to come on? Drop your email in the chat, and I'll send you a link. I'm gonna play my free YouTube music for a second. No, it's just you're just showing as your name. If you give me your email, if you drop an email in the chat, I'll share the link with you so you can come on right now. I'll tell you what, there's only 12 people watching, right? So we are in a really large chat room yet, so I'll drop it right in the chat room for you. If you want to come in, you can come in. Just click that link, and you can come on, and we can build. You know, I appreciate my family that we have. You know, we growing. If you haven't hit the like, we got 12 people in the room right now. Please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, please do subscribe. Please share. Please comment. You know, let's grow together. Let's learn together. You know, as I mentioned, next week we have a very special guest coming on the show. Next Sunday at 7, we're going to have Dr. Gwendolyn Midlow Hall. Right, she's the author of both of these texts. So you can definitely ask her some questions. I think it'll be a very informative discussion and interview. Another unique thing is she is the creator of the first slave database ever to be placed online. And it was from the, she did her work on the Louisiana parishes down there in the New Orleans area. They were able to trace over 100,000 African enslaved people that came through the port of Louisiana, and that's all in a database online right now. I got you, my brother. All right, my sister Ajay, 1 second. I'm going to drop the link for the brother. He just asked for the link to the book. I want to make sure he gets that.
Okay.
All right, my sister Ajay, 1 second. I'm going to drop the link for the brother. He just asked for the link to the book. You might have to mute your.
I think I got it now.
All right, Sister Ajay, welcome to the Black Prophet Hour. I appreciate you being on the show tonight.
Peace, peace.
Let's build out. So, what'd you think?
No, I definitely get the people kind of just take any definition and run with it.
Yeah.
So not because of the copper color, but you mentioned the $5 Indian.
Mm-hmm.
So if you read the Dawes Roll Act, all that was white people paying to be classified as Native American.
What's that called?
It's the Dawes, DAWES rolls, like, you know, dinner rolls act. It's actually a group of documents. And that's when they first recorded the five
civilized tribes.
Five civilized tribes. But from what I'm researching and understanding is what they did was they wouldn't allow the so-called Black or Negro to be classified as Native American, and that's when they gave them the title Negro. They were like, oh, we want to, we're Native for whatever reason, because we know even the people that did come from Africa mixed in with the other tribes when they ran away and escaped. So like, even in that much, you having that little bit of ancestry here, you can claim, which that's what I don't understand is why don't we just claim that? Because they literally claimed being Native American just to steal the land.
No,
you know what I mean? Like, so the saying that, hey, there's a good chance that someone in my bloodline, even if I'm completely of African heritage, probably escaped and married in or hid in a tribe of really copper colored people, because I mean, I'm not a black person, you know what I mean, myself. So
I don't necessarily have any problem with that, right? I don't have any problem. I think that as African Americans, like I said during the lecture, and a lot of us don't even use that term, but I think that term is for me, it's growing to have even deeper meaning, especially when we think about the fact that the indigenous or Aboriginal Americans and the Africans that were brought here, they mix together, right? So people who call themselves African Americans oftentimes do have ancestry from both groups of people.
Yeah.
Now, so what I find sometimes is you have people who purely want to adopt the native ancestry and completely abandon the African ancestry as a means to an end. And what I mean by that is the ultimate goal for some people is just access to America on equal footing, not as a second-class citizen, but they want access to the wealth, resources, and riches of this land as full citizens.
Yeah.
And they feel that, you know what, if I say that I am indigenous or I have indigenous blood, I have, just as much right as anyone.
Right.
Now, for me, that, that's a political argument, and I understand that argument.
Yeah.
But my politics, however, are slightly different, right? I don't necessarily start my politics with where my people were kind of dropped off. I start them from where they were picked up. Right. And the reason why I say that is because the European, regardless of his nation, it doesn't matter if he's Portuguese, it doesn't matter if he's British, French, none of that matters. What they all agree on is that they are going to dominate non-white people all over this planet, and they are going to control the resources of the planet, and they're willing to drive us all off the planet to achieve that end. Mm-hmm. So for me, my politics can't be such that I adopt one part of my identity so that I can essentially gain more access to this European nation when I'm looking at it like this is something that was built on the genocide of one people and the enslavement of another. So for me, this thing needs to fall so that we as African or indigenous or Aboriginal people across the globe can build up something that's actually built on true righteousness, something that's built on, us being connected to nature. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So that's the reason why I critique, oftentimes this movement, because I see it as a lot of people are using it as a means because they think they can successfully integrate and access power in America by adopting that identity. So that's the large part of my critique.
Well, I actually serve as the vice president of Indigenous. So, and truly, that is by claiming Indigenous, we then have it's recognized by whoever UN, all the countries, different countries have signed off on it. If you identify as Indigenous, no matter where you are, you have the right to self-govern. So it's not really about grabbing access to the US and their resources. It's about being able to actually self-govern and start to create our own economy rather than trying to take over and get access to this one. It's saying, hey, we're indigenous, y'all have to leave us alone. We are able to have our own, we're able to do what the Black Panthers, what all these people have done as indigenous, not as Black people, because then they label you as the Black power extremist. Then they can label you as those things because they're like, oh, well, you're still saying you're a part of us because you're using our titles. Well, if we say, no, we're indigenous, and most Black people can find one person, great granny, great somebody's granny was in a Native American tribe. It's probably registered somewhere as being in a tribe, so you have that in. Now, that's not to say you're denying your African heritage or anything like that. And we have to also know that the Africans were sailing and educating and trading over here before the European before they came over here. So, there was already that mixing of culture. I think, in the Olmec temples, they found like 8 or 9 different languages on their walls. Like, it was where they were teaching different languages. So it's like we all know we were a world people. We're all the same people. It was just that, and now we are letting them divide us by what they were. Okay, that person's more red, and that person's more this by their classifications, rather than saying, okay, whatever, we had somebody who was here before y'all were here. So we're going to take that claim and we're going to run with it to create our own, because we have a right to be here. Not that we have a right to the U.S. resources, but we have a right to build our own resources. Yeah. And that's what our organization has stood on at the United Nations. That's what we have stood on in court. That's what we have stood on, and it's worked. You know what I mean? Like, so we're just like, all right, let's just roll with this. Like, it's not saying we're not African, but we're just gonna roll with this because it's working.
So I respect that, right? Mm-hmm. I respect people who make an argument and then they articulate it based upon a position that they are looking to achieve, right?
Yeah.
It's a means to an end. I don't necessarily have to agree with it politically, but I understand that not all of us are always going to agree, right? So as someone like who really like loves my people, I'm not going to be condescending to people that because I don't agree with their philosophy.
Right.
But there are a couple of points that I kind of like want to let's take further in the discussion, right? So, mm-hmm. So you mentioned kind of like indigenous identity versus Black identity, right? So with Black identity, you're saying that this is an identity that's essentially imposed upon us from the European.
Right.
Whereas the indigenous identity is an identity that we can adopt ourselves. However, if we adopt it ourselves, we have to make use of the institutions that the European has set up to maintain his dominance.
No,
what do I mean by that? So what I mean by that is we have to rely on the acts and the laws that were written by the UN, the United Nations, which give indigenous people rights. Now, the UN, based upon my studying of history, is mm-hmm. an institution that is put in place to maintain white supremacy and white dominance. For instance, if you look at the brother Patrice Lumumba, who was mm-hmm. assassinated by the U.S. government in the Congo, one of his greatest limitations was the fact that we put too much faith in the UN. Mm-hmm. And when you go through their processes, there's something referred to as consensus theory. Right. So consensus theory is essentially the belief that the institutions, rules of law, agreed upon processes in society will mm-hmm. be enough to right the wrongs that have been done to us.
Oh, no.
So just one last point.
Mm-hmm.
I'm of the mind that white people operate upon a principle, and it's a very old principle. It's called might makes right.
Right.
If no rights that you have can be supported or enforced without strength. So for me, I don't necessarily, the reason why I lean so hard on the Pan-African identity is because that I recognize that Africa, the Africa is the source of all the world's power. B, as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Now, African people weren't the only people that were displaced as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. A good deal of native or indigenous people in Americas were also displaced because of the transatlantic slave trade. However, as a result, African people were brought all to the West. And my thing is, if we identify with where we were picked up, if I'm African here in America, you're African in Haiti, you're African in Jamaica, you're African in Canada, and we're all operating with the same principles and the same code, understanding that our goal is to build a system that's based upon justice, that denies the legitimacy and the authority of this current wicked system that we have in place. I believe that that's a stronger political play than relying on indigenous identity in order to kind of like to make the claim. And my last point, and I'll let you get right back in. My last point is this. I hear oftentimes a lot of people in the indigenous or Aboriginal community make the claim that, hey, we're all the same. We're all one, right? African people or Aboriginal people were the first people here, and we were everywhere on this planet.
Right.
To an extent, I agree with that, but I think that we have to have the terms and the science and the timelines correct. And what I mean by that is I'm someone who embraces the scientific, not the racist, but the scientific out of Africa theory. I believe that mankind has its origins on the African continent. Now, I believe that people from the African continent left the African continent and populated this entire earth. But when we come to, I guess, the late pre-Columbian period, right, before Columbus got here, those people who Columbus saw when he got here, as a result of the long period of time that had passed from when African people left the continent and populated these new lands, those people didn't necessarily look like you and I. Just like the Europeans, you know, those are African people who lost their pigmentation as a result of going through an ice age. Just like the Chinaman or the Asian, those are African people who lost their pigmentation because of the climate. They became yellow, brown, white, red, all over the globe. So I don't necessarily like to simplify and just say that, you know, we are all one people. I think that we have to embrace Africanness because African people truly are the mothers and fathers of the planet. And until African people are back controlling the planet won't be dictated based upon principles of righteousness, principles of nature, and the planet will continue to be sick and be driven towards destruction. So, yeah, I'm sorry for the, you know.
Oh, no, you're good. Well, okay, the first thing about relying on the UN for things, it's not about relying on them. We have our own book, we have our own law, we have defined everything ourselves that we actually stand on for our rights. But then when we address them, but we're like, hey, and you also signed off on this Declaration of Rights. You've also signed off on this. You've also done this. So you have made yourself responsible for respecting our laws that we have, like that we have written down for ourselves because you have signed off on these things. So it's basically like a switching of the, putting a cat in the bag, you know what I mean? Rocking the hard place. We have our own law. We're indigenous. You signed off on this act, that act, that act. So now you're responsible, or you have to go and face those criminal court charges over there. You know what I mean? Like, and they've already, like Australia has already paid and done their, and are bringing their indigenous people back into power, which if you watch the Coconut Revolution, their indigenous people are darker than you. Yes. That have been the Aboriginal people that have been there.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
And I don't want to lose it.
Okay.
So the question that I was going to ask you, and I just had. Okay, the question I was going to ask you was this, because you said now that they have made these laws and they are holding themselves accountable to these laws, we can essentially hold them accountable. So the question is this: if we study history,
right?
At any point throughout history, has the European signed a treaty that he's actually upheld?
Well, That is a no. However, if we look at, since they've been signing treaties, we haven't been standing on law how they see it. You
The
understand?
European only has one law, though. His law is might makes right. It's the law of the jungle. You know, Darwin refers to it as survival of the fittest.
Right. But if everyone disassociates from their system saying there's a better one, they have no more might. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm saying. If people are seeing that there's another option, then might goes away because, I mean, y'all can't do everything yourself. You know what I mean? Like, so until people say that there's another viable option, and what we're learning is by identifying and saying that you're African, but you're actually here in America and you can't truly, like, they can't deport you back to Africa. That's what they can't do.
Mm-hmm.
Because, but by saying that you're African American or you're African Black, you're whatever that is, but your roots aren't here in America, well, they're saying, well, okay, so when we're ready to send people back to where they come from, where do we send you? Because you truly have no claim in Africa. I can't pick a country and send you back to it. Well, you know what I mean?
I think first of all, like, if they wanted to send me, like, so for instance, the indigenous people that were here when they got here, the Aboriginal people,
right?
Many of the people who they made war on had right blood claim to this land.
Right? No, they did.
Down to the Caribbean, they sent them to Haiti. They sent them to Barbados. They sent them to Europe.
They also had paperwork and laws that told them that they could do that.
But no, I say that to say that even if I made claim, indigenous claim, they could still, if they wanted to, because of might, right? Might makes right. They could still say, I don't care what you claim. I want you out of here. You're gone.
But now, if I don't have, thing is they always have to have paperwork, though. They always have paperwork to back them up. And their original paperwork was the writ of discovery written by the Pope that said, go civilize the savages all over the world. If they're not Christian, then you have the right to kill them. That's where they're. That's where their right came. That was where Manifest Destiny came. That's where that came from. Was from the Pope.
Yeah, I think.
And the writs of discovery. That's where they're like, okay, finally we got our permission to go kill everybody. So while they don't necessarily follow their treaties, there's always a paperwork trail because their treaties went against the original paperwork. So the original paperwork always stands, right? Until that was rescinded by a later pope saying, oh shit, that's wrong. That's not Christian. Now we fucked up. Let's go back and we have to say the indigenous people, this is your land. But then the catch-22 is if you become federally recognized, you're right back into their system. So as soon as you become federally recognized, they just get their control back. So that's the other catch with claiming indigenous is everybody wants to go to these federally recognized tribes, which again don't have rights because they become racist under the U.S. government.
Yeah, and
so it's always a paperwork trail that we don't see, and you think it's just might, but they always have paperwork to back it up because court's their thing, paperwork's their thing. Like that's what they do.
Yeah, I think I want our brother Sweet James Jones to because he's been supporting the channel for a while. This is actually only my second, but I want us all to be able to engage here. But one of the points that I wanted to make, and I keep losing my thoughts because I'm trying to do a bunch of different things at once. And just really quick, I appreciate everybody in the chat room. Welcome, Sister Marwan Mold. I believe you said that you from Ethiopia. Just welcome to the chat. I appreciate you being here. Just make sure you like, subscribe, share. Everybody that liked so far, I appreciate you guys for liking tonight's discussion. But there was a point that I wanted to raise, and I should be writing things down because sometimes I get scatterbrained because I'm an Aquarius and we're in air signs. I'm all over the place.
Yeah, me too.
But I think that I don't necessarily believe in the Europeans' paperwork. I think that he will always dishonor anything that he puts on paper. So I think that that's not a strategy. I think that's a strategy that ultimately will lead us to disappointment. If we if we put too much faith into the paperwork. But what I will say is, even with you identifying yourself as indigenous and
Mm-hmm.
staking claim to, your mixed race ancestry, the indigenous part, to say, hey, I have rights to this land, I support that claim for you, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I'll stand in solidarity with you on that claim.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I know from a race first perspective,
Mm-hmm.
I know that the African people are essentially the ball that the world spins on. Once we stand up, Marcus Garvey used to say, Africa is only sleep. You know what I mean? She's not
Right.
dead, she's just sleep. When Africa wakes up, you know what I mean? When that rat bites the tail of that sleeping cat, eventually, she's going to wake up. So, my job, the reason why I'm on YouTube, the reason why I'm on Twitter is to try to wake our people up,
Right.
wherever they are. But I say all that to say that I still support you and your claim as an indigenous person. I still
Right.
see you as my sister. I'm just saying, from my political perspective,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to put too much faith in paperwork, and I don't want to send our people down that avenue.
Right. But I mean, you have to have your own law. That's the start of the paperwork, is you having your own law written down and you having your own stuff to say this is where we stand.
Yeah, but my law is based upon divine law. You know what I mean? When we look at
But that doesn't protect you. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's what I'm saying. We've gone to court. Like, they interact with us as American nationals, as the indigenous people. Like, when they send us letters, when they talk to us, when they invite us places, they actually interact with us as the titles that we gave ourselves, as the tribe that we are. And from Jeff Sessions to Obama to everybody, like,
no, I
so
think, but I
it's
don't
just
think.
that first step of saying this is our law. Like, you have to have it written down, otherwise you fall under the law of the land. So
I
if
don't.
we don't know the games they play, we will never be able to get out of the bag, and they can always justify what they do by their law, just like they did in slavery. You know what I mean? So if
I
you
think.
don't learn the game that they're playing, you can never get out of it.
I just think that the number one game that they play is law, and their paperwork, and I think that even with, I think that they're okay with us choosing any identity that we want to have. We can say that we're white. I don't think that it would matter to them,
It
because,
doesn't. That's still a race under their classification.
but what I'm saying is, any identity, any law, if it doesn't upset the paradigm, Dr. Amos Wilson used to say a lot of us are being trained to be black faces on white power. If it doesn't change the paradigm, it's not a threat to them. So I don't think that the paperwork uh, route necessarily changes the power paradigm, and that's more so what I'm concerned with.
Hey,
So how do
can I
you
jump in this?
change? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm with you, sister. I agree with some stuff you're saying, but I'm gonna have to disagree with, like, it's European law, so it's like you have to go back to them. They enforced everything through might, like you said, through might, through violence, through terror, whatever. They that's how they enforce things. So going to them through law or through any kind of due process or whatever, to me it's no point. You know what I mean? Like, like David Banner say, they respect two things: they respect finance or violence. And with indigenous law or whatever you're trying to claim, if you don't have no economics or a military or something like that to back that, it's pointless. Because
But it's not, because we're operating. That's what I'm trying to get around, is that we are operating as who we are.
and
So
not to cut you off, but it's like,
yeah,
y'all may be operating, but how are y'all going to make them respect you? Like,
we already do.
but they don't have no fear. They may say, okay, you this or whatever.
They
Like, you
don't
just, what you best
they
say?
don't need to fear us. They just need to leave us alone. That's
But
it.
that's white supremacy. White supremacy all over the world. It's all about fear. They control the whole world through fear. So
Through
you can't really go nowhere where they leave you alone. They
yeah.
everywhere.
But
You know what I mean?
if you claiming your right to self-govern, to say that we are not a party to your system. We're not asking you for resources. We are not We're not asking you for anything.
But
We just have a right to live just as if you go to any of what they consider them cults, or they consider them religious communities, or you consider them indigenous communities, they leave those communities alone once they are defined how they're defined. They don't go mess with the Amish communities.
I guess
they don't do those types of things. So that's where learning how to protect yourself and learning how to define yourself, where they're like, okay, that's out of bounds. It's what we have never done. We have never done that before.
Can I ask you a question really quick, brother? Just before you, and then you can go. I just want to ask one question. You know, what we consider it a contradiction to say that we're stepping out of their system, but we have to go through their system in order to step out of it, right? Meaning, like, we have to go through them to claim our rights as indigenous. Like, we have to use their system to support our rights as indigenous.
But we didn't use their system.
Didn't you say you used their law to do it?
No, we wrote our own law.
Okay.
We wrote our own law, our own book, and saying this is what we're standing on, which also happens to coincide with what you wrote and what you agree with. But the true strength comes from us saying this is our law that governs our tribe.
And I agree with
that. Is codified. So that's where the power comes from. But then you're like, oh, but guess what? It's also in yours. And now, because we stepped outside of your box and we're pointing back in your box and saying, but this is where you say it in your box too, so we're good to go. And they're like, oh shit.
No, I think that we're good. I think that, so the only point of disagreement will be, for me, I respect any acts of self-determination, but the disagreement will be, there doesn't even need to be a communication to them that says, oh, we're good to go because of what you say. Because that doesn't even need to happen. Like, if you're self-determining, if you create a law and you have a tribe of people that are being governed by that law, I respect it. You don't really fight for me. I'm just saying that don't create a law and justify it or believe that it's enforceable because of the fact that it agrees with their law and that.
Oh no, it's not. That's not why that's not why it's enforceable. It's codified in there. This is the divine law. This has been that is what it is, and it's not based on their law. That it is, it's based because that's what we say, but we can also use your own law where you say the same thing. So that's just like going to another from an indigenous tribe in America to one in Africa and saying, oh, we're coming over there to visit, we have similar laws, so we're going to hold you to our law while our people are over there visiting. That's basically that's all we're saying, is like, when we're there, we're going to hold you to our law. And when, you know what I mean? Like, and so y'all have to respect our law. And that's where the even playing ground comes from. And that's where we haven't done that since slavery. You know what I mean? Like, we haven't done this particular, we haven't taken this particular stance since slavery. So
I want to let Brother James get in as well, because I want it to be dialogue. So
like my whole thing with that is, it's just like, how can you back that up? Like, if like you say that they respect it, you say that you want to be left alone, but what if they want to mess with you? Like, look at Tulsa, Oklahoma. They was by themselves. They were building by themselves. They was left off, and then white people just came in, messed with them, and destroyed the whole town and a whole bunch of other communities in the country. But
again, they weren't standing on being indigenous. They were black. It's legally okay to destroy everything black people have over and over and over again.
That's my problem right there, where it's the mixing of if we're black or if we're indigenous or blue.
It's their labels. It's about labels. That's what they use. They use labels. So until you come up with your own label, you fall under the laws that they give their labels. So
I think we have to create a code, and we have to do for ourselves and be able to control and build and get to a point where we are acquiring power, where
so how do we do that if we don't claim where we are right now? Like, we can't link with all these people all over the world when you don't have your shit together at home.
Yes, but I mean, do the indigenous people have their shit together?
Not the federally recognized tribes. That's what we're saying. You don't go to be federally recognized. You say, this is who we are. This is what we're standing on. This is what we're going to build. And then let's build it. But all the indigenous tribes keep going back to the U.S. asking for stuff, asking to be recognized, asking to be essentially a part of them instead of actually staying separate, staying indigenous, and actually self-governing.
See,
so that's the catch-22 is a lot of what we think of the Native American and indigenous tribes are not that. They are the $5 Indians. They have been bought. They follow the rules of the U.S. That's not staying true to your indigenous claim of a right to self-govern if you register with another government. You know? That's
to me, it kind of sounds like a lot of shadow boxing. Like that's what brother Neil.
That's what they do.
No,
like,
but I'm talking about
saying,
like
that's what they do.
This whole ordeal, it's kind of confusing because, like you said, like the different tribes and all this. And I'm with the brother Omuale, like us as Africans. I think that is one distinct thing where we can unite on, is because we're all oppressed because of our color of our skin. I know you say that they don't recognize black, but who cares what they think? We're oppressed because we're black, and that should be a code or unification off that
yeah.
trait.
I mean, well, yeah, the African, the like we have relationships with Africans too, but however, we can't be African nationals. We can't be a part of their indigenous organizations because we are not indigenous there ourselves.
Africa?
Yeah. I mean, you're indigenous where you were born. That's why they can't really kick the white people out of South America, because by their law and what they're going on, you're indigenous where you were born. So we can't kick you out if this is the only land you've ever lived on.
But okay, now I go back to kicking out, but it's just like, I don't know, man. Like,
I'm just saying, like, once you're born there, you're indigenous there. That's what indigenous. You might not be Aboriginal, but you're indigenous there.
So you identify with the other tribes, like the Native American tribes, like the Cherokees or the...
No, I don't identify with them. I only identify with Keblan. That's my tribe. I don't identify with the rest of...
And are these Afrocoid, I don't want to say black, but Afrocoid type people, or is...
Yeah.
What is it? Okay.
This is what, yeah, it actually probably says that definition of the copper color in the Aboriginal people in America. That is what.
See me, I just like I said, I just look at it from a numbers perspective, and me, like I said, I like to think I'm a Pan-Africanist. So
right.
I think of it in numbers, and I think of our mind, our goal should be, we should organize our minds here, and the Africans all over the world need to organize their minds in Africa. That's the end goal for us. Like, that's right. The only way we're going to get out of this rut is we get back control of our continent. And this is my mindset, where I think that's where we're from. That's the people that we should link up with, and that's the end goal, where we should go to Africa, because they said whoever controls Africa controls the world. And I think that's why we're oppressed so much. It's because we don't control nothing. We don't own nothing. So we should be focusing on that, trying to build militarily, financially, all these things, build networking, just building across the world.
Well, let's just be honest. If we can't build in our own communities, what kind of world are we going to build?
But that can happen.
So it doesn't matter what label we do it under. If you want to do it under indigenous, if you want to do it under whatever. But what we're saying is we're having success under the indigenous title, where they are continue to label people who identify as black as extremists, as terrorists, as all of that stuff.
So can I jump in? Can I jump in really quick? I'm really enjoying the dialogue, and I appreciate you two intelligent folks for keeping it respectful. Because oftentimes we see these diatribes, like they fall into emotionalism. People start name calling, and the fact that y'all haven't done that, like, I really, really respect that. Like, you know, we have the sister who's standing strong on her position, and she is being respected. We have the brother who's engaging with her and not being condescending. So I really appreciate that. But I just wanted to weigh in really quick. You know, from the perspective of a Pan-Africanist or of a Garveyite, one of the things that I think that we have to always keep in mind is that, this European is waging this war globally.
Mhm.
And if we don't have a response to his war that is global, then we'll fight it in one area, right? You may win the battle here in America, and if you're losing the battle in Cuba, if you're losing it in Ghana, if you're losing it in London, wherever African people are, if they're catching hell there, but we're winning here, then ultimately we're still losing,
Mhm.
because the fate of African people, wherever they are, is tied to African people wherever they are, right?
Mhm.
So that's why, when I talk about Pan-Africanism or Garveyism, it isn't for, I don't necessarily want to, claim an identity that gives me indigenous rights to this land, although I have deep history and roots in this land. This land has shaped me. I love the culture that we as African people have created here in America. I'm protective of that culture. But in traveling, I love the culture that African people have created in other places in diaspora. I love the culture in the Bahamas. I love the culture in Jamaica. I love the culture that the Africans have created in Haiti. But my point is, we are all under attack by the same entity. So unless we have an identity or a politic that links arms wherever we are, and regardless of our geographic location, nothing that we do will work. And for me, I think that history has kind of like proven that point. And that's one of the reasons why, when you identify as Black and identify as African, you are looked at as a radical or as a terrorist, because anything that seeks to displace this current system of white supremacy is seen as seditious and wicked and evil and everything else they want to name it. But at the end of the day, I think that that's what we have to stand on. Like,
but as long as you're standing on that, you are the enemy and you are a target.
I mean, that's cool. I'm okay.
That's what I'm like. So we can't look at them negatively for bombing Move or for destroying the Black Panthers, because the point is to bring down their system. So you have made yourself an enemy. You have made yourself a target, rather than saying you keep your system. Let us have our own system.
I think that
And
I'm not
as
sure if
people see that we have another system, they naturally leave your system rather than fight your system. We don't have to fight their system.
Well,
We just have to enforce our own.
yes. Well, see, to me, there's going to have to be some kind of sacrifice. It's not going to be easy. So when you say that they label us as terrorists or label us as dangerous or whatever, like the brother Malema says, he says that anything that you want that's good, there's going to be some pain behind it.
Right.
So that's my whole point. If they label us that, so what? We've been attacked for 500 whatever years.
But it hasn't worked. We haven't gotten anywhere. They
because
destroyed everything.
our organization hasn't worked. Like all our leaders, when a leader get killed, the leader dies, and then the movement goes.
Because we have no law, we have no paperwork, we have nothing to continue the actual culture. And if we say we are indigenous, we can then build a culture around what we want, and then we can actually continue our civilization. But if we keep going in movements, when the person dies, the movement dies.
I'm gonna ask this, and I'm asking this respectfully.
Okay.
So when Malcolm was killed,
mm-hmm.
Are you saying that us as Black people, if we would have said, okay, we're indigenous, after he was killed, we would have been good, we would have been better off?
As long as we actually had the paper, what are you're indigenous? Okay, so what are your laws? Can you show us your laws? Can you show? They want to see it. That's all they want to do is see it. Literally, we have walked in the court and shown this, and they'd be like, oh, okay. And they told them, oh, we didn't know who you were, because they assume that you're their property because you don't have anything else saying that you're not.
So
I want to,
and that's just simple. I mean, I'm just saying I'm just saying what has worked for us. And we've linked with Africa. We were working on a project in Goree Island. Like, we've been with Queen Mother Moore, and she, talking about becoming African nationals rather than American nationals, to try to link and build that bridge. But if we become African nationals, then they are going to literally want to say, okay, well, you're African, go back to Africa. You know what I mean? Like, and that's not what we, as our tribe, have decided that that's what we want to do. We don't want to go to Africa.
So let me say something here. I think that we have to be careful not to be deceived into believing that we can do anything as African people, as Black people, as Indigenous people, that will stop the European from attacking us. The European is a numerical minority on this continent, and he's threatened by your very existence. When he created the law, survival of the fittest, he pushed entire humanity down to the level of animal, whereas though humanity or mankind was operating in harmony with nature and with one another, the Europeans said, no, this system does not work for me and my numbers as a people. So I'm going to create a system where I prey on all of you. I'm going to classify you, reclassify you, do whatever I need to ensure that I maintain dominance and control over your resources, over your land, over your people, over the resources under the earth, over your mental resources. That's the colonization. That's the plantation process. This is a process that is global. So no matter what he says or what he does or what you do, you can be at peace. He's never, ever, ever going to leave you alone. You can claim and
that's just not a reality.
And get gunned down in the street today. Like
exactly, but that's why you actually need your own community, not just your own block, not just your own space in the city. You actually need your own.
I got you.
Where you're not actually a party to their system.
I got you.
Because that's the only way where you're not a threat. You're not I'm not trying to take down your system.
No,
that is not.
I see what you're saying.
That makes you a terrorist. I mean, right? It's because their system is wrong. That's not saying that their system isn't wrong, but the fact that you're trying to take it down makes you a terrorist. And that's just the bottom line.
But it's like, even if you are indigenous or whatever, you have melanin in your skin. This goes back to Francis Cress Welsing. It's a psychological thing that they have with melanated people. So you can be indigenous, you can be alien, whatever. When they see someone melanated, they have to dominate you no matter what. And like Omwali said, all around the globe, they have to do this. They have to maintain this system for their survival. So being peaceful, getting your laws or whatever, it's still, they're still going to come for you.
But that's a part of their fear mongering that they have instilled in Black people everywhere. So now they don't really have to do much more because they've gotten everybody so scared, like, oh, we're going to come for you regardless of what you do, because we don't respect anything. But if you do the research, you always find the paperwork behind what they've done. You always find other dark and melanated people that have gotten along with them while they were committing crimes because they also had paperwork.
But I don't want
to work with them.
But usually those dark and melanated people that have gotten along with them have also collaborated and cooperating with them and dominating and stealing from and enslaving other African or melanated people, right? So we've always had people who have cooperated, right? Dr. Jacob Carruthers used to say that, the African responds in one of three ways to the domination from the European. He's either going to, cooperate, he's either going to resist, or he is going to collaborate. Right, those are the three ways. Meaning, so cooperate. I'm gonna go along with it. You're dominant. I'm inferior. Whatever rules you make, I'm going to follow.
Right.
Or I'm going to collaborate. Listen, you're dominant. I'm going to play your game. How can I eat in your system? So I'm gonna work with you to do what you need to do, or I'm going to resist. I'm going to fight back. I am diametrically opposed to your system. You are my enemy. I am your enemy. I understand that this is a war. If your system exists, my life and the life of my progeny and the life of my children will always be under threat. So I have to do all that is in my capability and my lifetime to build a system that can stand in opposition to the system that you have built for your progeny, right? So I'm going to let me just say this to the chat room really quick. Listen, man, you know, at the Black Prophet Hour, like I said, this whole channel is really just about, you know, dealing with ignorance, right? So we want to have conversations that raise the consciousness. So we don't want to have a chorus of people who all think the same. So I appreciate people coming, but I appreciate the sister being courageous to stand on her square and to articulate her point of view, and we can have a dialogue so that the viewing audience can understand both perspectives. So it's important that we get all sides of the table. I mean, I'm not gonna sit down with no coons, but like I don't see this as a coon. You know, I think it's important that we get all sides of the table involved in these discussions so that the community, especially the younger community, right? Because our generation, you know, I'm 34, right? 34, married, 3 children. Our generation, we are in that bridge where we need to build something so that we can cross over this generation that's coming behind us, because if we don't, we lose the link and we lose them. You know what I mean? So I'm going to let my brother James go. I'm going to let my sister Ajaya go. Am I saying your name right?
Ajaya.
All right, I'm going to let my sister Ajaya get a last comment. I'm going to let my brother James get a last comment, and then I'm going to read one final quote from the book, Races of Men, and I'm going to close this up. Brother James, you first.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, yeah, so I pretty much explained my point on what I believe. I think African people, we have to be on code globally, because white supremacy is pan-white supremacy. If you want to say pan-Africanism, they practice pan-Europeanism, pan-white supremacy. So we're going to have something opposite of that to dismantle that system. We have to be for justice, stand for justice. So I think that's African people getting on code. That's us organizing our minds, organizing how we live, our finances, all these things. You know what I'm saying? It's a race first mindset. We, like you said, we have to get back to Garveyism. We have to get back to that thought to be able, and we need large numbers of people. We can't just have, you know, 3 or 4 speakers out there or whatever. We need large groups of people in this country, all around the world, like in South Africa, everywhere. We need all these people on one code. And it was good chopping up with you. It was good chopping up with you, sister. You know what I'm saying? You very smart, very intelligent, or whatever was nice, you know, going back and forth. But yeah, that's it. Black first.
And I came through Pan-Africanism. Like I started as a Pan-African, and I just saw this as a way to see success and change quicker right here, right around being able to combat stuff that we were going through every day in your day-to-day life. But outside of that, once we do have we have an economic plan, we have all that we're working to instill right now and put together. And then once we have that and we do create our stability to be able to then go and share resources and share funding with nations everywhere. And everybody might not come under that same title. Like, we're American nationals. There might be one in Venezuela that want to be called something else, but we essentially know it's the Pan-African ideology of us working together all over the world to instill something better. But the title of what you are at home doesn't necessarily change your relationship to others around the world that are going through the oppression too. And I think that's what we fall into when we start to talk about some people want to be labeled this, some people want to be labeled that, some people want to be labeled that, is that we have to remember that we can be labeled whatever, work on building whatever we want to work on, and still work with the other people who look like, or we have these similar stories of oppression with. And we don't have to let the labels limit how we can help and interact with each other. You know, like, just like I said, for us, this has been the best way for us to continue, for us to see change in our daily life. But we are not opposed, and we have linked with people in Africa with, you know what I mean? Like, so that's not, we still have a Pan-African ideology, but we are coming from we're going to get stuff together in our land, you get stuff together in your land, then we'll link back up as a world people and help each other build. But nobody can build with a boot on your neck. Like, we're literally getting shot in the street. We got to build right here to be able to protect ourselves right here, and then grow that, and then grow that, and then grow that. That's just my idea. So,
Respect.
but thank y'all for this.
Respect. All right, family. I just want to read one last clip, and then I'm gonna close this out. I appreciate everybody in the chat room for tuning in tonight. Don't forget to tune in next week. We're gonna have a very special guest, Dr. Gwendolyn Midlow Hall. She wrote the following books: Slavery and African Ethnicities in America, and she also wrote Africans in Colonial Louisiana. Like, I recognize, I think that more of us need to do a good job at being specialists. Me, I'm an organizer, and I try to do a good job at studying the history of our people wherever they are. But I recognize my limitations in knowledge. So sometimes I want to bring on people who are specialists in particular subject matter, so that they can speak to the audience, and the audience can be very well informed. So I'm going to read one last point. I'll share my screen with the family. Share my entire screen. This is what I want to read right here for y'all. Really quick. Boom, boom, boom. Where we at? All right. So this comes again from The Races of Men by Robert Knox. This is section 1 from The Dark Races of Men. So he writes, from the earliest recorded times, might has always constituted right, or been held to do so. By this right, the Slavonic race crushes down Italy, withering and blasting the grandest section of mankind. By this kind of right, that is, power or might, we seized on North America, dispossessing the native races to whom America naturally belonged. We drove them back into their primitive forests, slaughtering them piously. Our descendants, the United States men, drove us out by the same right, that is might. The same tragedy was repeated in South America. The mangled hosts of the Celtiberian adventures brought against the feeble Mexican, Peruvian, and Brazilian, the strength and knowledge and arms of European men, the strength of a fair, or at least a fairer race, right? So I want to stop right there, and I wish that Amos Wilson has this quote about power. And what we have to be about as a people is obtaining power. Marcus Garvey used to say that a strong man is strong anywhere. Europeans are telling us that for them, it's about power. It's about might, because might makes right. And it doesn't matter what rights you think you have. Those rights cannot be enforced if the group of people that you are a part of are not strong enough to enforce them. So I thank everybody for joining the line tonight. Race first, and please do join us again on the Black Prophet Hour next Saturday at 10 o'clock. Peace.